thanks for tuning in, everybody that's here. This is the third live stream that I'm doing for Axon Framework 5. And I'm going to do a bit of a rehash of the first live stream, where the first one was a migration of Axon Framework 4 to Axon Framework 5 Milestone 1. Now, we've released Milestone 2 a bit under a month ago now. I wanted to do it a bit earlier, but yeah, I was rather busy. So here we are. Here I'm going to do the Milestone 2 migration. Now, you might be wondering, why do a migration for every milestone? Well, I think it gives me a nice spot, a nice place to give justice to each of the features. So in the first milestone migration, I put quite some time into the new test fixture flow, how we have stateful command handlers as a means to make slices, like the event modeling slices, instead of taking the old aggregate approach. So yeah, the video is still valid, showing that flow. Whereas in this live stream, we got new features. For one, there's Spring Boot integration, so I can use this fully with Spring Boot. That's nice. Similarly, we have the renewed aggregate, or strike that through, entity modeling flow in there, which I also want to show. So this is why I'm doing an additional recording. I think that's fair. So I think we can get started. A very short bit about me. I'm Steven. I'm the lead developer for Axon Framework, and I've been working with Axon Framework for at least the last 8 years now. So I'm spearheading the major upgrade from 4 to 5. And this is why I'm here, to show you what we have in place. I have a bit of a notice. So originally we had planned that Milestone 2 also contained event processing, conversion, so the serialization flow, and message handler and dispatch interceptors. Due to time constraints and other planning related things, we had to split that milestone in 2. So instead of 3 milestones, we now have 4 planned. And those 3 pointers I just named, event processors, integrations, interceptors, and conversion serialization, will come to the following milestone with some additional benefits. So with that said, let's have a look at this project. So this is my pet project that I typically use for samples, which is a game rental application. For those who've been playing around with framework samples before, we have a thing called the bike rental. Yeah, this is very much a copy of that, but a bit more closer to me personally, because I'm, very much into video games. So yeah, for me, this resonates a bit more. So I went this route. Okay, so we got our project in place. Okay, so game rental application. We are going to the POM first, because we're going to make some adjustments here. So we see that we're using JDK 21. I can tell you that if JDK 25, so the next LTS, is out before we release 5.0.0, then we will, update it to JDK 25. That would become the baseline of Framework 5. I want to be, on the latest Java version. I don't want to trail back to old stuff because, for those who are in the know, Framework 4 is still built on JDK 8. It's not that I don't like JDK 8, but maybe I don't, I just want to proceed. I want to go to a more recent version. So we want to go along with that new release cadence and be a bit quicker about things. But let's change this version. I'm immediately going to do something weird because we had to do a patch release for a milestone. I'm going to be honest with you. I really didn't like doing this, but the Spring integration didn't work as it should have. And that was one of the major points for the milestone. So I really had to do another release for that. So I did. So please use M2.1 if you want to play around with this. We're going to add a version here as well. There we go. We're going to keep data.jpa and web plugs. I am going to remove the reactor extension because we haven't come around to doing the extensions yet. I'm also going to remove our console integration because similarly I haven't come around to doing that. I'm also not going to use our socket for the sample. Definitely going to do tests, so that can go in. And the bill of materials can go as well because I'm not going to do milestone releases of bill of materials. So what I've now changed is I kept the Axon test module with the right version, and I've kept the Axon Spring Boot starter with the right version. That's nice. Let's see if Maven is kind to me and that things work. All right. That should have worked. So now we're just going to hit Control F9 to have it compile. And then it should fail at several places because I changed the version. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to wait for that. I'm just going to proceed and see what it comes up with while I'm already going to kill some stuff. IntelliJ decided to start up. All right. Yeah, of course, the reactor command gateway and query gateway are no longer there because we're not using the reactor. We're using the regular one. So I'm going to kill all the reactor mentions. There we go. Going to add the right imports because I want to use the plain command and query gateway. I'm not dealing with monos right now, so I can remove all the monos. All right, completable future is what I want. There we go. Then the query should work. Yeah, that's nice. The commands don't, because the command gateway has already undergone API changes. The query gateway has not. That will come in the last milestone. So if we look at what we have here, we've got a couple of options. We can still just provide an object. We have this nullable processing context, and we can provide an expected type. So I don't have a processing context right now because I'm not in the context of processing anything else from Axon Framework. So I can just do null, as it clearly states. This is not the type it likes because this returns a command result. But I want this to be a completable future right away. Well, then you need to tell Axon Framework what the format it is you expect your response to be in. We used to do a lot of this under the hood with a lot of, ugly stuff. Let me be frank there. Right now, we do expect you to clearly state, okay, I'm sending this command and I'm expecting this type of a reply. This helps us tremendously with the conversion or the serialization, essentially. This will be more full-fledged in the following milestone, but for now, at least the command gateways and the query gateways, you must expect that you define the type you want it to be returned in. So we do that for the other guys as well. Here we just have a void. So just return void. There we go. So now these guys work. That is nice. We have one failing thing. That's because the subscription query many is specific for the reactor extension, and we don't have the reactor extension. So I believe, I'm a big fan of live templates in IntelliJ. It makes it easy to make the boring stuff. So here's the boring stuff. We don't have to look at this because we're not interested in that stuff. Okay, so we got our controller in place. That's nice. I'm going to remove a lot of stuff as well. So let us first move to the query side. So we dump into the projector. We don't have the processing group annotation yet. So I'm going to be very blunt and just kill it. Furthermore, our annotations are now always in the dedicated annotations package. So event handler and query handler need to go there. As you can see, so that's nice. So now this is working. That's good. We have another event handler. That's this guy. Again, we kill the processing group. We add the annotation there to the imports and we can go. All right. So we got our query side done. There are also a couple of things here about exception mapper and result handler. The exception mapper is for the @exception handler annotation. So I think it is still on the class path if I look for it. Yeah, so this guy. The exception handler is logic from Axon Framework's interception flow. As I pointed out just now, we don't have support for the interceptors just yet. So I'm going to kill that. We're not going to use that right away. This means I can kill my exception mapper. I can kill my result handler configuration. Here we go. We're going to destroy more stuff. For one, I'm not doing any dead letter management yet because we don't have support for the dead letter queue yet. That is slated for 5.0.0. We're doing our best to get that back because I do think it's an awesome feature, but not there yet. So let's drop it. And queue policy is also from the dead letter queue, so we can drop that. So I wish every migration was as easy as this, wasn't it? And we go to the application config. There's the stuff with the serializer, which we don't have, all kinds of logging stuff, dead letter queue. I think we can clear this guy out entirely. Bye. We don't need you. So there's more I can remove. All right. These guys again. There we go. And I think we should now be in a good spot. Bit of the properties. So I did point out we have Spring Boot integration. And we definitely do. And you do see that this is now documented. It understands this. So that's great. But we're not using these properties yet. That will come in milestone-free. So first we wanted to get the plain configuration a bit more grounded. So we tested it by making a Spring Boot version on top of it. And it does work, so that's great. And then the properties are, in all honesty, a very simple addition later. So I decided to, get a milestone done and do that at a later stage. So for now, I can just get rid of that. I think we're in a good spot to do another compile. So let's... Pretty sure we should hit the game, as in the aggregate right now. My gut feel is right. So a lot of things have changed here for sure. For one, I can get rid of the aggregate annotation, the aggregate identifier annotation, because we're not using that. We again have the annotation mentioned for the command handlers. Event sourcing handlers, we haven't changed that yet. We will. And then we don't have an aggregate lifecycle anymore, and we're not going to use that either, so we killed that. And yeah, so this is that exception handler that I pointed out. We're also going to get rid of that. As a prep, I'm going to move the constructor a bit up, because there are some interesting changes in here. First and foremost, we make this in an event-sourced entity. There we go. So this is the new annotation that Axon Framework uses to figure out if you have an entity that uses event sourcing. It will also be a form of the annotation that Spring will automatically find and then register your class as an entity, making a module out of that. You see something else that's broken. We're first going to go for the apply. You see I dropped the aggregate lifecycle.apply. I did so because the aggregate lifecycle used thread locals, and we don't want to use thread locals anymore because thread locals don't work very, very nicely with reactive support like Project Reactor. And that is one of the spearheads we want Framework 5 to be able to. We want you to be able to choose if you're going for an imperative flow or a reactive flow. So we cannot rely on a thread local, which would work in an imperative, but doesn't in the other. So instead of using the aggregate lifecycle to find the event bus from the thread local, we need to provide it. So we're going to do that as the appender, like so. So I now injected an appender. We're going to search for all of these, because then I can do appender.append. And that is essentially the replacement for publishing events. I also need to do something with these exceptions, because we changed the exception handling. Parental command exception, now the exception status code. This is insufficient. There we go. Don't care about the other, and we provide the details. So you see I'm making very specific exceptions, because I think you could arguably state that's part of the API of your application. This is why I'm using something special. I'm lazily injecting them in several places, because then I can replace my status codes. So these, this is wrong. This is different returner. So what I did when I originally created the sample project, I made it a list of enumerations with the specific exceptions so that I have a form of a common language I can speak with whoever is hitting my command. And that common language is then the status code, so that you don't have to rely on the fully qualified class name of an exception, which might be problematic. So we don't. Yeah, there is another thing that's broken, and that is this command handling constructor. I can tell you, command handling constructors are not coming back. They're dead. We removed them. So the way how to do this is by having a static factory method for a command handler. Pretty simple. So we just do void handle, but this wouldn't create a new instance. We wanted to create a new instance. So we tell the framework by so. So Axon Framework will automatically spot that this command handler is on a static method. And if it's on a static method, it will first invoke the constructor that is present. We again need to do something specific here though for the annotation flow. We need to tell that this is a creator of the entity. If I don't tell Axon Framework that it is this method that might create the entity, then it won't work. So you might wonder, why do I need to have a new annotation right now for this? Well, that is because we used to have something called the creation policy. I think it's still in a class path. Yeah. So the creation policy allowed you to do an aggregate creation policy of never, always, or create if missing, as you can see. We didn't want that in that way anymore. We wanted to combine all the ways how you would be able to create an entity. We couldn't have a creation policy on just a constructor, so we decided against, keeping the creation policy. Instead, we have an entity creator annotation, which takes that spot, which takes that place. So as it's now very clearly that's the starting point, I actually want to have these two fields that are just defaulted from the first event to reside there. I think that's nice. It immediately gives me a nice hint that I can make this final. So let's do that. All right. We need to do something in the core API. For one, you might have seen this if you were part of the previous one, we need to tell what the tags are of my event. The key game ID. You might again wonder, what is an event tag? Well, this event tag is part of our support for the dynamic consistency boundary. It is essentially an additional, association we attach to your payload when we're storing the event. So this separates the original aggregate identifier from you choose what your specific identifiers are you might want to query events on. So it gives a bit more power to you. It does give you some work in this area. We will provide a nicer way to do this, although some people do like the annotations. I also want to have a non-annotation based approach. That will come. Or let me be frank, the interface for that is already present, but configuring that is a bit too much work at this stage. So for now, the easiest way is this event tag. I'm actually going to do some additional ones so I can show that also this project can have additional tags. I'm not stating that what I'm setting now as tags is the right tag to take. I mean, adding somebody's name, the renter, as a tag, that sounds like an issue because that's PII, so personal identifiable information. But this is a sample project. I can do what I want. So I'm going to show it because I think it is very powerful to get that idea. So that is an addition you need to do to your events if you're taking the annotation-based approach. For your commands, same story. We killed the aggregate. So now we have a different one, the entity ID. Again, similarly as with the event tag annotation, we will provide a non-annotation based solution for the target entity ID. Again, also for that, we have a functional interface already in the background. We just not have made it such that there is an easier way to get that going. For now, in this milestone, this is the easiest one with the target entity ID. So I got all 3 commands, all 3 events. Okay, with some additional tags, that's nice. And we need to add a bit of configuration. First, up here. So if we go in this list, we see that we have a number of options. We can tell it what the types are. We can give it a criteria resolver, an entity factor, entity ID resolver, all kinds of fancy stuff we'll come to later. What I mostly need right now is to tell what the tag key is. It is this field that now matches with this field. If we don't do that, then Axon Framework does not know when you want to load a game, which, query to do. So essentially by setting this tag key, you tell Axon Framework that, okay, when I'm asking you to load a game, I want you to use this key and look in the event store for events with that key, and then with the identifier. And the identifier, in turn, comes from this target entity ID. Okay. Lots of specifics that we'll highlight a bit further with this entity ID resolver and entity factory definition and criteria resolver definition. That will come later in this sample. For now, I think we are done with the game. Yeah, we can go to our tests. So we got our game test. This, for now, uses the old fixture configuration. We don't want that shit anymore. So we're going to the Axon test fixture. There we go. And I'm going to be lazy because I made the fixture config like so. This is the thing I forgot. My bad. So you see that I'm expected to have a game configuration. This comes to the point that the Spring Boot configuration does not yet look for the event source entity. Similarly as what I just pointed out with the Spring Boot properties, this is an extremely easy bit to add and a lot less work than getting the actual Spring integration in place. So we decided in favor of time to do that in a different stage. But now I need this. So let's add Spring Boot configuration. We're going to make this a bean. Come on, please. Yeah, there we go. Public entity module. All right. And it expects the identifier and the entity. And then we have a game entity module. There we go. And now we're going to return. We have an event sourced entity module. And it's annotated with this as an identifier and the game.class. That is it. So once that solution is in place, that Axon Framework will look for the event source entity annotation in a Spring configuration, then it will find those. It will make essentially this registration and be done with it. But now we need this. And that became apparent by the game test. So we can go to our game test. And all right, let's rename to align. There we go. Configuration in place. I am going to do a very short bit of this flow for those who haven't seen the previous time around. So we have changed the fixture to be different. Right now you can break it up into the separate phases because we think that clarifies what you're doing. Although you can choose to do that in a different flow later on. But right now, this is how you do it. Why change this? Well, this gives us another way to test other things like when events, or potentially when query eventually, or given commands and events. By no longer relying on the old-fashioned aggregate test fixture that we used just now. So this guy, we are now a bit more free to test whatever you have set in Axon Framework. Furthermore, we inject the configurer so that we can take your entire configuration. I will eventually do this as a Spring Boot test, by the way, because then I can take the configuration that Spring Boot creates, which I think is pretty awesome. I'm not going to do these. I have my favorite live template for that. So there we go. The rest of the tests. If you want to see them in more detail, please check the first migration video, because there I show that part as well. Let's see, the demo gods are nice enough that this actually runs. And I can show some new goodness. By the way, I did mention it on my posts and in the messaging. Oh, that stuff is broken. I'm not going to fix the controller test. I don't think that's important. So I'm just going to kill it. What I wanted to say is that I intend this to take about an hour. So we're 28 minutes in. So a bit more of 30 minutes perhaps. Maybe a bit shorter, maybe a bit longer. Depends on how things go. But yeah, then you know that at least 30 more minutes are left. All right, so the tests work. This shows that my aggregate actually runs. Now, so what have I done compared to milestone 1? That is essentially that I made the old approach. I have one class with everything in it. Wherein milestone 1, I broke this down into having a separate command handler and a separate entity object. So I separated the command handling from the event sourcing, essentially. Still an option, but I want to show something which I'm truly very proud of. We're going to make this into an immutable object. So this has been a request we've had quite frequently and took quite some time to get that in place. But here we are, we can. So let's actually do that. I'm going to move our first event sourcing handler up, because this is going to be our constructor. And you think, whoa, can I have an event sourcing constructor? Well, yes, you can. I can use it as an event sourcing handler, though. I need to tell that this is an entity creator. And now I can construct my initial game based on this. Pretty cool, I think. Does mean I need to change these as well, because these now need to return a game. A new instance of the game. Of course. Yeah, I'm doing that right over there. And in this case, I need to have I still need to have that constructor, actually. Of course. So luckily IntelliJ is super quick with stuff like that. So there we go. Yeah, we need to set all of them. I'm going to be lazy at least. I could make it a bit cleaner, but I'm not going to do that right now. So we're going to return a new game. We have the game identifier already. We don't care. The stock change to do this dot stock -1. The release date is still this dot release date in this case. And we need to have something that I'm going to call the new renters. I'm going to make this into a new field. No. I'm going to make this into a new local variable, like so. New hash sets from the old renters. And then I'm just going to replace this guy. There we go. So we're going to do a similar exercise for this thing. So I'm going to take this stuff. Copy paste is our hero in development. There we go. And we're going to replace that. Okay. Ooh. I see what I killed. That's a bit of a shame. It should be -1. Okay. This should compile. Now I have an immutable aggregate. I think that's, yeah. I don't hear you applaud. I do hope you're happy with it. This took us quite some effort to get it in place, but I think this is very, very nice. I mean, for one, the identifier, you're never going to change the identifier of your entities. It's going to be fixed. You don't want that to be, well, adjustable. So at the very least, and I'm not taking that flow right now, at the very least, you could kill these and just make the identifier final, if you still prefer the rest to be mutable. But if you want everything to be mutable, if you want your entity to be a record or a Kotlin data class with vals, you can. And that is, yeah, that just makes me very proud. So I hope everybody enjoys this as well. Let's see if this still works. Because, well, you know, I'm also just demoing. Maybe I make a mistake. Only human after all. All right. Very cool. So, I made an immutable aggregate. Now, I'm going to do a bit more complex of a task. And that's, I'm going to make this non-annotated. Why am I doing this? You might wonder. Well, I want to show you all the other options you have by taking the declarative approach. Because again, I'm very, very proud that we did this, because this was honestly a lot of work. So this is where you see these other classes I was talking about coming back. And I think that's the last one. Yeah. So what you need to define is a combination of these three things: a messaging model, an entity factory, a criteria resolver, and an entity ID resolver. This entity factory is now filled by that entity, the entity creator annotation that you have seen. So yeah, we can mirror that flow by defining the entity factory and have a bit more power by doing it ourselves manually. The criteria resolver, that is that tag key that we added to the event-sourced entity class here. That's this guy. That is the criteria we expect to be set. Lastly, we have the entity ID resolver, and this is used to retrieve the identifier from the commands. So the basic entity ID resolver looks for the target entity ID. But now you have a lot of control to change that. For the key I, you might have also seen that to come back on this guy. So here we can define a criteria resolver. Oh, let's do it with a comma. Criteria resolver definition, if you like. So we can define, you see that this is a definition. This definition expects you to set the class that then generates that thing. So by default, let's go into this guy. By default, this uses the annotation-based event criteria resolver definition that we've been using, or the annotation-based event-sourced entity factory definition. Because when you're using event-sourced entity, we by default expect you to take the simplest route, which is the annotation-based approach. But if you do want to have your own, well, you can set those if you like. Right now, though, I'm going to do that fully manually. So, right. Going back to the configuration. For the messaging model, I'm going to be very lazy because in all honesty, this would otherwise eat up all my time. So I've got this model. I will explain it in detail. I'm first going to make this compile and runnable. App game, command response, there we go. This one we can make. So Framework expects you to set the component builder. The component builder always gives you the full configuration of Axon Framework and then expects you to return the other type. So in this case, that is a event-sourced entity factory. Here you see I can do from event message. That is the current flow we have because the entity creator is on the event sourcing handler for the game registered event. So that's the one I take. From no argument would be the basic old approach where you just have a constructor with nothing in it. And from identifier is the one I pointed out where you can at least define the identifier. We're taking this one, obviously. So, and then we get the ID and the event message. We're expected to return the new game. So we do a new game, event.get payload cast to game registered event. There we go. And I'm going to make this into a method because I think that's nice. Game entity factory. There we go. Bit nicer to look at. So, if you would be making your own configuration like this, I would recommend you break it down into these separate compartments because otherwise this builder is going to be too big. Furthermore, it makes it a lot nicer to test. So, we have our component builder again, and now we need to have a criteria resolver. So, You can always be lazy and just do it like this, and then it will understand what you want. For whatever reason, IntelliJ doesn't understand that this can be a lambda. Only if I remove it, you see? I really don't comprehend that. But yeah, whatever. If anybody does, please tell me, because it annoys me the hell out of it. So we have a criteria resolver where we expect a tag. Here we can define a tag or a string, but I'm actually going to use a tag, just clarifying how everything works internally. And this is where we got our game ID, and we expect the identifier to be the given identifier. There we go. So now we have our game criteria resolver. There we go. Move that down. Very OCD when it comes to ordering of methods. There we go. And then we have the last one. This time it's an entity resolver. And well, this is also rather big. So I made a one for this as well. ID resolver. There we go. And then it is almost time to dive into these live templated stuff. So I'm pretty confident this should work already. But I'm first going to talk through the messaging model and the game ID resolver. This messaging model, as you see, is an entity meta model configuration builder, which is a mouthful for a thing that gets the entire configuration and expects an entity meta model builder. So this gives you the basic builder, so you can attach logic to the builder. You can also replace it entirely by providing your own builder. In this example, I am not providing my own builder yet. I am stating that I have a creational command handler for the register game command. So this builder gives you these new methods. It has an instance command handler, so you need to very clearly tell it this command acts on an existing instance. This is the differentiation between create if missing, or always create, or never create. This is how we do that. We make that very specific. It used to be not specific at all, making it, in all honesty, pretty complex for us as maintainers of the framework. Right now, it's a lot more clear, making it clearer to debug, to understand, to perhaps contribute if you'd like to. Furthermore, you can go without the annotations by having this builder flow. I can't stress enough how pleased I am about this. So we got our creational command handler. This expects you to provide two things. One being the qualified name, so the name of the command you're dealing with. Now, this time I'm being lazy. I'm just giving a qualified name based on the class, but I could also call this the register game command manually. That's also a choice. You're no longer tied to the Java classes, which will make it a lot easier to align with, well, different libraries, or different languages. So you could send a command from a JavaScript telling it, a JavaScript application, telling it this is my name. You don't need to have the fully qualified class name anymore, because there is no certainty that that fully qualified class name exists in all places, even if you're fully in the JVM for all your microservices. So we try to resolve that by having a wrapper, a layer around that. In my sample, I'm being lazy. Then again, for a lot of cases, that would work. Second parameter is the command handler. The command handler gets a command message and gets this processing context we've seen before. And this is where it becomes a bit more interesting. You see that I'm invoking the static handle method of, what am I doing wrong here? This is what I'm doing wrong. I'm invoking the static handle method. I am retrieving the payload, and I know this time around that I'm getting a register game command because I enforce it so. In all honesty, I would love to cast it here, but we have not done that yet. So you need to do that cast yourself. We're definitely going to look into simplifying that. And this is where I injected the event appender. You see that the event appender is context aware, and it takes in the configuration. By giving it the configuration, Axon Framework will pull the event gateway or the event store out of the configuration. By giving it the context, Axon Framework is aware that you already have an active processing context. This is how we know that there is one unit of work from dispatching a command to publishing events. So you definitely need to do event appenders when you're publishing your events, because that is the way how you can enlargen your event transaction and make it so that it is part of your decision-making logic in your aggregates. The return type is, in all cases, a message stream. Is again one of the components I want to simplify a bit. So we can actually go into it to show the interface. You see that we have a message stream here. We enforce it to be a command result message of whatever. And this is now a bit wordy to do. This is why I made a constant that I just dumped in. I don't care about the return type. I just use void and nothing. So I'm being lazy here. Again, this will be simplified in the long run. For now, this works and gives us the flexibility to proceed. And I really like to proceed with Framework 5. It's this flow that would be, well, the same for an instance command handler. It's just a different bucket. So if it's a creational command handler, then it creates the entity, and otherwise it's acting on an existing entity. Then we have our entity evolver. The entity evolver is the bucket of event sourcing handlers. So an entity evolver gets an existing entity, the event that was retrieved from the event store, and then the processing context, which might be important to make some decisions. In this case, we only deal with game registered events, returned and retrieved, returned and rented. So those are the ones I deal with. If I have a game registered event, I know I can just pass along the entity because I'm already creating the entity based on this event. I don't have to invoke that again. I could, if I'd want to, do new game, and then event payloads. No, I can make this nicer with this flow. I could do this as well, if you like, but then you're creating the game twice, so you don't have to. So in this case, I'm just passing the entity as is because it's already been handled by the event. All right, that is our messaging meta model. There's a bit more to this though, and I'm not going to dive into details. This is how you could add the old aggregate member, or how we now call it, childs. So you can have an entity child model that you attach. And it's an entity child model, which is again such an entity meta model, which has command handlers and instance command handlers and entity evolvers. And then in turn again could have children. This is how you could go back to the old approach, where you have an aggregate with entities in it, with entities in it, with entities in it. So yeah, you can also do that in this one. And the last bit I want to show, that requires me to kill everything. That is where I have the entity and meta module. I believe it's on this one. No, entity and meta model. This one. Yeah. Here you see we have a 4 entity type and a 4 polymorphic entity type. So if you have a polymorphic entity or old-fashioned aggregate, you need to completely override the builder. It is this bit, the first bit, which is why you get the builder as well, because Axon Framework will automatically, by default, do the for entity type, this one, with game.class, because we're acting on the game, and then you have the entity evolver, child, all that stuff. We anticipate that 9 out of 10, you just have a clear entity. If you do want to use a polymorphic entity, this is the way to go, which would give you an additional operation to add your set of concrete types. These concrete types are in turn, again, entity meta models, because all of them are, well, a thing with message handlers on it. Yeah, so a lot of detail, but I really wanted to show this because this was such an amount of work to get this in place. And it makes it so that we can go without annotations, which is pleasant. And yeah, let's jump to the last one, and then we're going to test without annotations, because let's see if I'm actually right. This is that entity ID resolver that I talked about before, that will get every command message and then will resolve the identifier for that command. So in this case, I would not be using the target entity ID, so I can also remove those. I'm just getting the game identifier directly, and otherwise I don't care. So let's actually test without annotations. There we go. Then we kill this one as well. Then we need to go to the game. because the game has a lot of annotations. I'm going to kill this one. Let's actually just do it like this. Because later on I do want to go back. Right. Then I could have done this quicker. There we go. Okay. No annotations. Nowhere. Let's go to the game tests. And actually run this guy again. Bit of parsing involved. Makes sense. A lot of things have changed. Let's see if I did it right. There we go. Awesome. This leaves me 2 things to show. One of which is Spring Boot test and then actually run the application. For the Spring Boot test, I'm going to bring back all the annotations, which has a clear reason. One I'm slightly sad about. And that is because right now you would need to do all the conversion manually. If I'm going to make a Spring Boot test out of it, I'm actually going to use a test container with Axon Server in it because, well, we're running an application with Axon Server. Now, once an event is stored in Axon Server, it is, well, byte array. So every event you would get would be byte array. So you would need to do the conversion as it stands at least in that entire flow I've shown of creating your entity. That is also something we will simplify. Again, we're not there yet though. So bear with us. Test containers. Okay. Please? Yeah, okay. My machine is really tired of all the work it is doing, I guess. So we got our game test. We should have the stuff in place to make this a Spring Boot test. Yes, nice. Gonna add test containers to it. There we go. We're gonna add an auto-wired private application configurer. So right now I would get the configurer that Axon's Spring Boot starter would create. And I would be able to set that there. Pretty cool. This not yet uses an actual Axon Server instance. So if I'd run this right now, it will fail because it cannot connect to Axon Server and it does want to connect to Axon Server. Because my configuration is such that it wants to do that. I'm really too fast for my laptop. Come on. Go. There we go. So this should fail. Assuming I'm right. See, it is spinning up the entire application. All right. Bam. It's failing because it is missing the right components. Right? This time it's the recording bus. But yeah, at least my mind serves me right. So we're going to do another one of these guys. Again, I want Axon Framework to do this automatically. So I'd very much like to have some form of add Axon Spring Boot test, something like that. Where you can then define this is the host name and the port for Axon Server. We're not there yet. But having this basis, being able to get an Axon Server container, this already exists in Axon Framework, by the way, since Framework 4. And then I need to define my connection separately. So I'm doing that here for my game test. Getting the host and port from the container. This is all pretty straightforward. So we can have this done by the framework. Similarly here, I'm actually setting the configuration that I'm using that host and port number that I'm given, so that framework will automatically know this is what I need to set. This is also another thing I find ugly. For the test fixtures, we need a recording version so we can do the validation. This needs to be integrated in the test fixtures. Right now I had to do it like this. My bad. Yeah. The last thing I need to do is on every test, I want to clear out Axon server. Again, something we can do automatically for you. So yeah, this is the goodness to make this run. Let's hope compiling is a bit quicker this time around, because my God. There we go. Instantiating. Test container is doing their thing. Okay. Let's see, we're good on time. That's nice. But yeah, testing the full live suite. Oh. Class configuration issue. Test ignored. Container startup failed. Could not create start container. Timed out. Waiting for URL. Yes, you were very slow, so I understand you timed out. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to push this like this. So this branch here, Axon Framework 5-M2 migration, I will put that online on my repository. You can have a look. I will keep it like this so you can play around with it if you want to. But in favor of time, I do really want to show that this can run. So I'm going to actually run it up, start it up instead. This should be a bit quicker than the tests. Please. Right, already looks a lot faster. Okay. Database stuff. All right, started. That's cool. So now we can go back to here. This is my repo, by the way. So this is where you have the branches that I was just pointed out. This is also where you have the M2 migration branch. So this is where I will have those changes, so you can have a look. Got an Axon server in the background. We got a connected application. That's nice. I do need to clear out my context. Make sure that it's clean. So let me do that. Delete. I'm going to create. And for the time being, I very consciously need to create a DCP-based context, because it's not Axon server's default yet. So yeah, let's do it like this. We got our DCP-based context. That's nice. And I think with that, we can go back to the application. Yep. We can get rid of you. We can do a very quick run of all my registrations of my games. There we go. And this should be successful. Yeah. Let's also do that for rent and return. Boom. Some of these should fail. Some of these should succeed, because that is how it works. So we can go back. Yeah, we see some exceptions. That's correct. I'm not going to dive into the details of these endpoints right now. This is just something to test if the application does as it's supposed to. But we've actually published events. We can see that up here. We have some events. So we can go to the search pane. We can search just by doing a plain search. And now we have our game registered events. And we see that we have a game identifier. And we have that title I was talking about. This is the additional field that I added to the event tag. So just to clarify, registered. This tag. Showing that you can have several tags for your events as you see fit. All right. That is all I wanted to show. So I reached the end. Let me hear what you're curious about. Perhaps what you'd want to see in a following live stream. I think I at least also want to push it without this right away. This should be a toggle. There we go. Sure. Glad to have been of service. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have your questions at a later stage, perfectly fine. we actually have a getting started for Framework 5. So if you go to docs.axonic.io, here you have the new getting started for Framework 5 plus consistency boundary. So you could walk through this to essentially do roughly the same as what I did. If you want to look at previous videos, previous live streams, they're on YouTube. Here you have my face again, but a couple of months ago. This live stream will also be put on YouTube, so you can look at it back at a later stage. And we also have, where did I put that? Yeah, on our forum. So discuss.axonic.io. We have a dedicated spot for the milestones. So up here you see the releases. You can fill in a feedback form if you like. So there's a feedback template. So if you do have feedback, much appreciated. We'd love to hear what you think about stuff like this, because that will, it will shape what we're going to release. So you can influence that if you like. But also if you just have a question saying, hey, I'm doing this and that with milestone 2, but how does this part work, or how does that part work? Just drop a message here on the forum. That's perfectly fine. So, all right. With that said, thanks for attending, and I hope to see you the next recording. Cheers.